care handled. So I am Lisa Salberg, founder and CEO of the HCMA, not currently in Denville, New Jersey. I'm currently at UPMC. Thank you for their hospitality. Tomorrow morning, we will be conducting both a medical education program and a patient ed program here in Pittsburgh. So it's not too late to sign up if you haven't already. And today, Marty Maron is commandeering the office of Mark Sherrod at NYU. So Lisa's not in Jersey and Marty's not in Massachusetts. We are in different locations, and we are here today to bring you a new clinical trial from the sponsor Imbria Pharmaceutical. And we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanism and what this clinical trial is. At the conclusion of this webinar, you will be given the opportunity to take a survey and let us know if you are interested in talking to a clinical site coordinator about potential participation in this clinical trial. You may remember a few years ago, Marty and I talked to you about a similar clinical trial. It was an earlier phase trial, and because of the positive outcomes from that first trial, we are now bringing you the second trial. So with that being said, all the way from Pittsburgh, I sent it back to New York City to Marty Maron. Marty, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome to everybody joining in. We're happy to have you, and it's great to have a chance to kind of talk a little bit about a really important initiative in HCM that really has a lot of relevance in terms of trying to understand better whether we can identify new treatments for the population of HCM patients that are symptomatic with non-obstructive HCM. So we're going to be focusing on non-obstructive HCM today. And as you know, and as we've talked about many times on podcasts recently, you know, maybe the greatest unmet treatment need in HCM is really in those patients that have the non-obstructive form, who are very frustrated, rightfully so, by the limitation that their disease poses on them with very little treatment options currently available. And so this is a very relevant discussion, particularly if you are one of those patients out there with non-obstructive HCM and are not happy with how you are feeling. So with that said, let me share the slides. Okay, we can see those.
You're not, yes, you're in presentation mode now.
Okay.
Niner fast stat. I'm actually almost able to pronounce it without tripping over my words here.
Yeah, it's a hard word, but the drug that we're going to be talking about today is called niraparib, as you can see there. And the rationale behind it, how it works, the rationale behind it, and why we're excited about it, very excited about it, as a potentially new drug treatment for non-obstructive HCM. The study that's evaluating the drug right now is called FORTITUDE HCM. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's first come back just so we are all kind of aligned a little bit here on the story as it relates first to non-obstructive HCM and kind of why we're, you know, talking about new drug therapy in this disease is because, remember, non-obstructive HCM, which we define as no gradient at rest or with exercise, defines non-obstructive HCM. And if you've got non-obstructive HCM, you're in the 1/3 or 30% of HCM patients. The other 70% we consider have outflow tract obstruction and have different treatment options. Okay. I just wanted to show that kind of the way we look at this is that at any kind of one point in time, if you look at HCM today, you know, across the country and globally, what we have is about almost 40% of patients who have symptoms that frustrate them, despite the drugs that we have, like beta blocker or calcium channel blocker. And importantly, a small subgroup of those patients, though, will progress to develop even more limiting symptoms, even sometimes requiring what we call advanced heart failure treatments like transplant. And so it's this group here, almost half the patients with non-obstructive HCM that, really represent what we're calling the unmet treatment need for non-obstructive HCM. Okay. And just to talk really kind of high level about why patients with non-obstructive HCM may develop symptoms. And I'll just illustrate that here. Obviously, you can see to the left here on the slide is a heart that represents HCM. You can see in the middle there, the septum is thick. The left lower chamber is the left ventricle. Blood's coming back to the left ventricle with oxygen to the left upper chamber, then through the mitral valve there to the left lower chamber. And that left ventricle is what's pumping that oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body. The problem with the problem that we have here with in non-obstructive HCM is that the heart is thick and it's stiff in a way. It's what we call kind of non-compliant ventricle or muscle. So it doesn't relax as well as it should. And that impairment in the relaxation of the heart is particularly relevant when patients are exerting themselves with daily activities, because when that happens, as the heart rate increases, the ability to fill the left lower chamber with oxygenated blood efficiently is really impaired. Okay? And that leads to what's called decreased cardiac output, what's going out of the heart, that oxygenated, rich blood that your body is really depending on to feel good when you're exerting yourself is decreased compared to a patient or compared to a normal person without HCM. And that impairment of cardiac output because of this stiff, non-compliant heart muscle is what leads to patients feeling symptomatic and, of course, impairing their ability to exert themselves appropriately or to the level that they want. And the medicines that we've had available to try to help with that impaired compliance, beta blockers, you may be on them or have been on them, or calcium channel blockers, those are the two drugs. The reality is that they just don't really work well enough here in this issue. And so the efficacy, as we say, it is poor here, and which is why we still have a large unmet treatment need here for this problem. And just to kind of take that one step further, this impairment in the filling of the heart, the decreased cardiac output leading to decreased exercise capacity, that process that I just talked about in the heart is very dependent when it happens on energy, what we call an energy dependent process. Meaning what I mean is that in the ability of the heart, normal or HCM, to relax well and fill appropriately with blood requires a lot of energy to do efficiently and normally. Okay. And certain heart diseases, and HCM is one of them, have a deficiency in energy in the muscle of the heart. There's actually a depletion of energy. And that depletion of energy is really a problem here, because when you've got less energy available to the heart muscle, you're not going to be able to relax the muscle as efficiently and effectively as we want, and therefore can't increase the stroke volume, the blood coming in, or the cardiac output. And so we are focused then here on the deficiency or the decrease in available energy in the HCM heart as a potential target for treatment to try to improve that. Okay? And I don't want to get too complicated here, but what I want to show you here is to the right, this figure here. Okay? And what you're looking at is kind of a cell in the heart. And within the cell is a structure called the mitochondria. It's a big word, But to make it simple, the mitochondria within the heart cells is responsible for producing energy that the heart then uses. The energy storehouse and production facility within the heart muscle cells in HCM and in normal hearts. And in normal situation, normally, in HCM, what's happening is that the heart is using fatty acids as its primary energy source. So the fatty acids are being brought into the cell, into the mitochondria, and it's being broken down into energy. That's the main point here. Okay? The heart utilizes as its primary energy source fatty acids. Okay? However, a much more efficient form of energy, greater source of energy, is glucose, not fatty acids. And so part of the premise here with this drug and treatment is to try to preferentially shift the HCM heart's choice of utilizing glucose over fatty acids to provide the heart muscle more energy, much more energy, each heartbeat. Okay? That's the premise here, and that's all we're really representing here. And that drug that can accomplish that goal here is called niraparib. Okay? Just showing you that's the name. Here's the chemical structure of it. That's obviously not important, relevant necessarily, but showing you that it can be broken down. It gets broken down in other compounds. So niraparib as a drug is really attractive in a number of ways. We're going to get to its mechanism again in a second, but as a drug, it doesn't require any monitoring, doesn't affect the QT interval. A lot of drugs in cardiology can do that, which can raise risk. And it doesn't affect, as we'll see, blood pressure and heart rate. It doesn't have those kind of effects on that, which is also advantageous as well. Okay? And the way niraparib works as a treatment, let's come back to our heart cell to the right here and the mitochondria, the energy production facility of the heart muscle. The way the drug works, to make it simple, is it sort of blocks the ability of the mitochondria to break down the fatty acids. It blocks that. It inhibits it. Okay? And all that does then is it translates into the heart muscle cell, the mitochondria, having to then shift to using glucose, which is what we want. Because as we said, we want to be able to use more glucose because that's going to give the heart much more energy each heartbeat to allow it to relax more efficiently than if it was using fatty acids. Okay? So the niraparib is shifting the choice of energy in the heart to a much more favorable source, glucose. Okay? That's how it's working. And so with that said, we wanted to first test the idea that if we could increase or improve the energy utilization of an HCM heart, would that help patients with non-obstructive HCM? Okay. By, again, more energy, more opportunity to relax the heart with exercise, to allow it to fill appropriately with blood, and to pump that oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body in a more efficient way. Okay? So to test the therapy, the niraparib, as many on the call may know, the way that that's done is through clinical trials, studies. Phase 1 usually is very early development. Phase 2 is usually bringing that therapy to humans, with an emphasis in phase 2 on the safety and the tolerability of the drug. And then phase 3, if it gets to phase 3, if phase 2 looks good, getting to phase 3 is when you really test the drug more for efficacy. And hopefully, if all that looks good, the efficacy in a phase 3 trial, that can sometimes form the basis to have that drug approved in the United States by the FDA. Okay? So here's the first study with that drug in HCM. It's called IMPROVE-HCM. That was the name of the study. If you're listening, you could have potentially participated in this study. It's been completed. And it was a phase 2 study, phase 2A study. And what we did is we took patients with non-symptomatic, non-obstructive HCM who had not only symptoms, but also were limited by exercise during exercise. And we randomized them to niraparib or a sugar pill, placebo, on top of the medicines that they were already on for their heart. Okay? And then they were treated in a blinded way, meaning the patients didn't know if they were on niraparib or placebo, nor did the cardiologist enrolling the patient. Both were blinded to that. That's how almost all clinical trials work. For a treatment period of 12 weeks, and then the drug stopped, and then a sort of a follow-up again after that, 2 weeks later. Okay. And because this was a phase 2A study, the primary, output here, goal, was to evaluate niraparib's safety and its tolerability in patients, human patients with non-obstructive HCM. That said, we also looked at efficacy measures. How much better did patients exercise? How much better did patients feel? And other changes to heart structure and function. Okay. All right. So that was the study. And we randomized a number of patients to that study who completed it. And here are some of the results. Okay. First, and the bottom line here is that when we talk and we're looking at how the drug did in terms of safety and tolerability, which again is the primary focus of the phase 2B studies, you can see here that when we're looking at adverse events related to the drug, they were very minimal. And they were similar proportion of patients that experienced some side effect compared to those who were on placebo, kind of balanced there. Okay, so there's no evidence that there was any increase in issues if you were on the drug versus just a placebo pill. And most of the treatment emergent events were considered mild to moderate. Okay? And importantly, the niraparib was associated with no significant changes in those patients that were on it in the heart pump function, that's the EF or ejection fraction, no significant changes on a patient's blood pressure or heart rate at all either. Okay? And those are all good things, of course, too. So it was well tolerated, generally safe. Okay? And then when we look at the endpoints and measures of how the drug did in terms of how it performed with the, the two treatment goals that we have, making patients function better and feel better with non-obstructive HCM, here's what we saw. If we were looking here at, it's a little bit of a complicated slide, I'm just going to make it simple for you. This is looking at the effect of niraparib on symptoms in the study. We measured that using a tool, a questionnaire. Goes through all kinds of different aspects of patient symptoms. It's called KCCQ. That's the name of the symptom questionnaire, which generates at the end a score. Okay? So if we look here at patients that were in the study that ended up on the drug, niraparib, what you see in the bottom left here is the first square here is the score symptom score at baseline before the study. And then the second square is the symptom score in those patients on the drug at the end of the study. And these two squares are, the second one is going up. It's increasing. That's good, meaning that the KCCQ score increased in patients on the drug, which means that they reported feeling better. Their health status improved on the drug. And when we compare that to patients that were on the sugar pill, placebo, you can see the two squares for the placebo group pretty similar. Okay? So that meant that for patients on niraparib, they achieved a significant improvement in their health status compared to placebo. Okay? Actually, they improved their KCCQ score by 9 points here. And that 9-point improvement, to put that in context, we consider anything that can increase a patient's score of 5 points or more to be a clinically meaningful improvement in how patients feel. Okay? Almost double that here. Okay? With the niraparib. To the right is a very similar type of analysis. It's just looking at, for those patients that were limited at baseline by NYHA status, just a different way of looking at symptoms. What we see here again is the same principle. Patients on the niraparib had an improvement in symptoms during the treatment period compared to patients on placebo. Just a different way of looking at it, but same outcome. Okay, okay, that was how the drug made patients feel. How about, did the drug make patients exert themselves, the physical exercise, better? Okay. And we measure that using a test called a cardiopulmonary exercise test. And one of the measures that we look at is this abbreviation that you could see at the title of VECO2, VEVCO2, which is just one of the exercise measures of how patients are exercising in the study. Patients get that study before they begin, and then that was repeated again at the end of the study. Okay. And in this example I'm showing you here, the first two squares, again, this is the patients that were on the niraparib. The first square is the level of exercise limitation before starting the study. And the second square is patients on the niraparib and how they exercised at the end of the study. Okay? In this measure of exercise that we're looking at, the VEVCO2, what's good is when it goes down. Okay? When the box goes down compared to the baseline, that is telling us that the patient actually had an improvement in their exercise capacity. Okay? And that's what the group that was on the niraparib showed here. And again, when you compare that to patients that were just on the placebo pill, here's the placebo group. First box is the placebo group at baseline, and then the placebo group at the end of the study. And you can see that these boxes are going the opposite way we would want. There was a worsening of exercise capacity if you were on the placebo here, because that second box at the end of treatment is higher than baseline. Okay? And then the difference here up at the top of negative 2.1 just means that the difference between being on niraparib and being on placebo was significant in terms of the improvement that the drug provided patients in improving or enhancing their exercise capacity, okay, compared to placebo. Okay? So let's summarize that study for a second. It's again, phase 2 study using a drug called niraparib, which is a novel meaning kind of new, investigational, obviously we're studying it, called a cardiac mitotrope, which just means that a mitotrope just refers to a drug that can enhance the energy utilization of the heart, we talked about. And in the study, the drug was seen to be safe and well tolerated in symptomatic non-obstructive HCM patients. And treatment with the niraparib was associated with significant improvements in exercise capacity that I showed you. That's the VEVCO2 study. And compared to baseline, the niraparib improved how patients felt, improved their symptoms. Okay? And so these results provide support to progressing or moving forward to a larger study in symptomatic non-obstructive HCM to further investigate if this drug can really help improve in a larger number of patients how they feel and function, and ultimately could potentially fulfill the aspiration that we are hoping to achieve, which is meeting the unmet treatment need in this disease. Okay. So with that said, let me just a few more slides just to show you that after that study that I just showed you was published about almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, year and a half ago, the reaction was very favorable among a lot of HCM experts. Okay? And that's demonstrated here in an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine just recently by Dr. Eugene Brunwald, who, if you are not familiar with him, he is one of the most influential and impactful cardiologists of our time, period. And he is also responsible for describing HCM initially when he worked at the National Institutes of Health in the late 50s and 60s. So he's somebody with a lot of expertise in HCM. And he wrote a review article on the disease in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful, medical journal in the world. And as a snippet from that review article on HCM, Dr. Brunwald demonstrated his enthusiasm in a way for the potential of this drug in HCM through mentioning it, but also mentioning how it helped improve exercise capacity, like we just talked about. And in an editorial that accompanied that article, or other articles in the New England Journal, and in other studies, other review articles, I should say, other authors also underscored the potential of this drug in non-obstructive HCM. So that's all good because there's increasing enthusiasm even among different experts for this initiative. And that, as well as the results of the first study I showed you, have supported moving forward with this drug in a second study, which we're going to call a phase P2B, just means phase 2B. The prior one was phase 2A. This study is called FORTITUDE HCM. Okay? And its goal is to help confirm the findings that we just showed you in a greater number of non-obstructive patients. Okay? Just showing you the outline of what the study looks like. It's very similar to the one we just did. Symptomatic, functionally limited, non-obstructive HCM patients who are randomized then to niraparib or placebo on top of their usual cardiac drugs for 12 weeks. And a number of different tests, similar to what we've talked about, are done at baseline, some of them through the study, and of course at the end of the study, the week 12, to assess safety and efficacy again. I'm not going to go through all this, just to show you that for FORTITUDE, which as I'll mention in a minute, has just begun in some sites, and there are going to be an increasing number of sites who are going to be starting this study in the US and globally soon. The inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria are shown here. I'll just show you, if we focus just on the inclusion criteria, who are the kind of patients that could fit into being potentially candidates for this study. Non-obstructive patients, 18 years or older, with a BMI, which is a measure of weight, less than or equal to 35, their pump function of 55% or more, symptomatic, and have to have an exercise study where you're demonstrated to be limited by exercise using that test that we talked about. Okay? Those are the major kind of inclusion criteria. Again, we're going to be evaluating, kind of similar to what I talked about with the first study, measures of how patients do on the drug using that KCCQ questionnaire and the exercise study. So to conclude, FORTITUDE HCM is a phase 2b clinical trial where we're hoping to enroll 165 symptomatic, functionally limited, non-obstructive HCM patients randomized to niraparib or placebo for 12 weeks. Nice thing about niraparib, there's no need to titrate the drug. It's one dose. It's global trial enrolling in the US now. It's selected sites, and we're increasing those as we move forward here. It just began in those selected sites. And so we're going to look toward early 2026 for more broad inclusion, more sites in the US coming on board to enroll patients. And again, to conclude then, the goal here is to demonstrate clinically meaningful improvement with niraparib in non-obstructive patients to make them feel better and function better, to then support what is the next step. What would be the next step here would be a phase 3 clinical trial. And it's in phase 3 clinical trials, again, remember, where the drug is tested and, if shown again to be safe and effective, can often lead at that point to approval to treat patients that were in that clinical trial, like non-obstructive HCM. That would be the next step. So
we have some questions.
Stop there. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the end. So let's open it up.
We can stop your screen share so people can see a little bit. So the first question that we had that came in right at the start of the webinar was, what if you had a myectomy and you're still having symptoms? Are you non-obstructed if you had a myectomy to address your outflow tract obstruction?
Just coming back to the here. The answer, so sorry, I just want to make sure that I understand the question. The question was, if you had a prior myectomy, can you be in the study is that
correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe if you've got a prior myectomy, as long as it was a certain point in terms of timing relative to the study, and you're non-obstructive and you meet all the other inclusion criteria, that would be considered. Yep.
I believe it's 6 months post-surgery.
That's right. That's right.
And then you're clear to go because you're now non-obstructed in the current state.
Right. You would be
so John, we answered that one live. Yes, non-obstructive after 6 months. So if your surgery was over 6 months ago and you're still experiencing symptoms that are limiting to you, you would qualify for this study. Julie, if you could drop a link to everybody that is in the webinar now. You're also going to receive this link after the webinar. It is a survey that you can participate in. It tells you there's 3 sites that are opened right now. And there are a number of other sites that are opening up first quarter, second quarter next year. If you choose a site that is not currently open, we're going to be getting back in touch with you on a regular basis, just to remind you when it will be opening up, and we will be working with you on those. If you want to participate in the site that is already open, you can send us your authorization so we can send your contact information straight on up to the site coordinator at that individual site. We had 2 questions here pretty much about the same thing. And that is, can you be on Camzyos, a myosin inhibitor, the only approved one we have now, and be eligible for this trial? And the answer to that one is no. If you're going to be on, if you're on Camzyos, you need to wash out for 6 months before you can be in this trial. So you can't say, well, I'm maximized on Camzyos and I'm still having some symptoms. I want to try this other clinical trial drug. That's not permitted in this trial design. So to the 2 anonymous attendees who asked about Camzyos, no, you would not qualify for this trial while on Camzyos. And those are the questions that we have standing at this time. I was going to put some slides up and explain where the survey is. So for those of you who have been around the HCMA for a little while, let me just explain that the way that we participate with the process of clinical trial recruitment. We're going to give you this survey. You're going to answer some basic inclusion/exclusion criteria questions. If you get through the survey, you'll be given the opportunity to look at the timeline and make sure that that timeline meets where you are in your life at this time and for the next 16 weeks after. And then you'll be able to give us permission to send your information, for example, up to the Leahy program, where their clinical site coordinator will then call you and get you into the program and get you in for evaluation. We try to make it as easy as possible. Some of the sites, again, will open first quarter, second quarter of next year. If you're out of the United States and have an interest and there's nothing for you on the survey, you can send an email to the HCMA and we will see what we can do to find you a site in that country. But we are currently just recruiting for the US at this time. Marty, is there anything else you want to tell our participants about being in a clinical trial? Like, we're talking about the details of the mechanism here, which is really important. But what should a patient think about when they are considering participation in a clinical trial?
Well, I mean, I think that, obviously first, really important, maybe obvious, but just to, emphasize that, these are clinical trials. So you have to be dedicated and motivated to participate in them as they require, oftentimes a certain level of, dedication and follow-up and commitment here. And also, taking on other, parts of, responsibilities that come with looking at an investigational drug. I mean, that's maybe obvious, but I think you have to be focused on that. And I will say though that, I'll emphasize, I guess, here that there are a lot of different, maybe potentially different reasons why, a patient may want to participate in a clinical trial, and that can be different for different patients, but some of those can include the obvious opportunity to improve that patient's clinical status by being in a clinical trial, by getting a drug that could benefit them over whatever else is available right now. And also, I think really important here is, the feeling too that you're committing to an effort here to help, improve our understanding and the science and hopefully actually the clinical care of a broader community of patients with this disease now and hopefully in the future. And so that's a powerful thing, to help to contribute in that way here, because ultimately, as we've said many times on the podcast, there really is no way that we're going to be able to advance new treatments without the commitment of patients, to that idea. Okay. You have to obviously feel comfortable and you have to be knowledgeable about what you're entering into. And that has to, of course, make sense between you and your cardiologist and your family. But the idea of participating here can have an impact on not just you, but a broader, much broader population, of patients with this disease, not just here in the US, but globally, potentially. So, we always have to, put put all of it in context, but that's also an important message, I think.
I think it is too. Something that I've been really proud of within our HCM community on clinical trials is that we've had a really good mix of male to female gender.
Right.
And I am putting a call out to all my girls. We need women in clinical trials.
Right.
We need people of color in clinical trials. We need to understand how drugs work on all populations. And we're really going to try to make this a 50-50 male to female. But to our Latino and African American and Islander families, please consider a clinical trial. It's really important that we know how drugs work in all different people, and we want representation. So if you're in one of those communities, I ask you to come along and try a clinical trial. I've done a number of clinical trials in my personal experience, and I do feel that while you're doing them, they're interesting. You get to see a different side of healthcare, but you also get your own mark on science. You get to say, I participated and I gave back to the community that's given me so much. So if you're considering, even if you think you might want to talk about it, fill out the survey, have a conversation with a site coordinator. You don't have to commit to anything until after that conversation, and then you sign up. But if you do commit, we do encourage you to do everything in your power to complete the commitment. Because if you get somebody that starts and then they fall off, then you got to reload that patient back in, because we need the numbers. So make sure that your schedule looks like you can handle it. And we would love to hear about your experience on the other side. Remember, if you're part of the HCMA community, if you are participating in an active clinical trial, we ask that you don't discuss it in social media, because you have the potential to bias other individuals with your experience. So yes, please participate. And when it's done, share your experience, but not while you're in the middle of the trial. Marty, anything else our people need to know about the process?
I mean, I think, if there's any interest, I think the thing to do is, you can always discuss it with your cardiologist. Obviously, that's always a good first step here. I think that can often give patients also the additional perspective, potentially the additional comfort in moving forward with participating in that. Also to understand some of the other details that come along with, committing to a clinical trial and everything. So I think, having a conversation, if there's any interest, having a conversation with your cardiologist is a great first place to start, or reaching out to the HCMA Society to get a little bit more understanding of what it may mean in general to participate in a clinical trial, I'm sure is also very helpful as well. So I think that's kind of how I would, advise people who could be interested to start, the process.
I'm going to go back to something that you brought up on one of your closing slides. For those who have heard me tell the story of the origin stories of HCM in the United States, you might remember the name Claude Brady. And I talk about Claude Brady a lot. He was the first patient diagnosed, but the doctor who diagnosed him was Claude Brady, or I'm sorry, was Eugene Grunwald.
Yeah.
Get my old schools confused there. Sorry, guys. So Dr. Grunwald has been around since the beginning, and he's followed the science. He is well into his 90s and still following the science. And the fact that he brought this particular agent up in the review article says an awful lot about the uniqueness of the mechanism and the promise of trying. We can't guarantee anything, but if Grunwald mentioned it, it probably means something, especially in our little world of cardiology. All right, I'm going to check one more time for any questions. This is your last chance to ask questions. Julie has dropped a SurveyMonkey link for anybody. You're going to get a copy of that in your email as well. And that's closed caption.
Will this be posted and accessible online?
So I was able to get my Facebook connected. So we are live on Facebook right now. It will also be put up in its entirety on YouTube. It will be linked into the survey. So everybody who's getting the survey after will have a link so they can watch us talk about this. And they'll see they'll see everything that we've presented. You'll have the survey to answer. And if you have any other questions, you're more than welcome to call the office and we can connect you with whomever we need to connect you with. We know that there's only 3 sites currently open. And it's, if you're in another area where there's a site that says pending in the survey, let us know you're interested. As soon as it opens, you're going to be the first to know. And you're going to be the first in line there, and we'll make sure that they know that you're waiting for them. So for those of you who don't know what it's like to be behind the scenes in clinical trial work, there's contracting and there's paperwork and there's, health systems that have to be worked with. So some of them take a little bit longer to come online, but we don't want to pause and wait for everybody to be online before we let people know about this trial. There's stipends involved for participation. Your travel based on where you're going to be might be reimbursed or will be reimbursed. And then you'll be getting a stipend for your participation. So we'll be giving you that information from the site coordinator, because some sites have slightly different contracting. So they'll give you that information. That's pretty much all I have to say from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today. Marty, any other words parting from New York?
Yeah, I just want to thank you and the whole group at HMA for, obviously everything you guys do, but also, in particular, the interest and support in helping to support, these kinds of efforts, and as I said, it's a village, as you and I have always talked about, and
Yeah.
you're in the whole group's support for research and supporting clinical trial development and recruitment is just so instrumental in the success of these initiatives. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time again to focus on in this case this initiative for niraparib. So thank you.
You are very welcome. And thanks to Ross and to Linda and to Claudine and to Julie and to Stacy, who's here with me, and the rest of the team at the HCMA. It does take a village, and we're happy to be that village for so many of these big hearts. We hope that you all consider at least taking the survey and learning a little bit more about the drug and the mechanism. And if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to ask. And on that note, we will wish you safe travels from New York to Boston, and we're here until tomorrow night, and then we head back east. So, and I have to do it. I have to do it because it's our first public meeting since the announcement for your little brother. Congratulations, Bradley Maron, the new editor of Circulation, which is a big honor. And I'm sure your dad I can see the beams coming all the way here to Pennsylvania.
Well, thanks for that shout out, and we're really proud of him, and it's an incredible honor, and we're looking to support him in making really one of the top cardiology journals even better, and we look forward to helping him transform great science through the journal in a way that will make a huge impact globally. So I appreciate you giving that shout out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All righty. Thank you all for joining. And thanks to our sponsor, Imbria, for doing all the hard work to bring this trial into existence. It doesn't happen easily. And I know there's a big team over at Imbria too, who's really excited to get this moving. So thank you to our friends at Imbria.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thanks, Lisa.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.